All right. Welcome, everybody, joining us yet again with another one of our candidate interviews. I am Rhonda Walker, chair of Our Revolution Washington. Tonight, we are joined by Amber King. She's our secretary, and Courtney Love, our vice chair. Tonight, we are going to be talking with Rory Summerson. He is running for Thurston County Commissioner. And I would love for you to go ahead and say hi to everybody, Rory, but really kind of tell us what made you actually like step up and run, especially like right now.
That's okay. So it's a great question. So let's start here. So my name is Rory Summerson, and I am a candidate for Thurston County Commissioner District 1. I go by he, him, his pronouns. Really, my reason for running was because Bernie told us to. I joke about that, but it's a real thing, right? So like I got involved with politics back in 2015, 2016, much like a lot of the people that I personally know. And I was motivated to get involved by Bernie Sanders. And so the subsequent movement that arose out of that campaign and continues onward now is the Our Revolution movement. And so it's really just been this guiding principle of mine and many in our movement is that we've got to have young candidates stepping up that share our narratives, that share our values, and continuing to push the needle in a more progressive direction that promotes the health, safety, and well-being of people in our communities. And so really my whole reason for wanting to run is because Our Revolution promoted me to run here at the local level. Bernie did at the national level, and also Our Revolution National. So it was really, I didn't see any other youth at the time that I decided to step up that were running for this level of office. I didn't see any Bernie-crats running here locally, and I was like, if nobody else will, I will. And I never saw myself getting into politics. Like when it really comes down to it, I didn't see myself wanting to be a politician. I see myself as an advocate and an activist for change. But in terms of actually getting involved with politics, it's not something I envisioned for myself long term. It is something that I felt was necessary more than something that I wanted to do. And so that's really what prompted me to jump in was the lack of representation we saw, the lack of diversity we saw, and being urged by people in progressive circles, by Bernie and by Our Revolution, telling us to step up and make change. So that's why I'm in it.
Beautiful. Could you go into kind of your district, not only just like the outlines of what's in your district, but the people within your district?
Yeah. So in terms of support or the reason why I run, or because I do
just kind of in general, we like to let people know the district that you're running in. So kind of the geographical area, like what's involved, but also just the people there, like in who lives in your district. What is there diversity, that kind of thing?
There's not enough diversity, I will say that. So Thurston County, unfortunately, is predominantly white. We are hopefully going to be seeing that dynamic change, hopefully very rapidly, but suffice to say it'll happen over time, if nothing else. We do see that in Thurston County, so the way the commissioners' districts are broken up is it's in 3 districts, and they're supposed to be equally representative of the population in Thurston County. So it's split 3 ways, top to bottom. So the very center wedge of Thurston County would be District 1. That's the district that I'm running in. So that would cover everything up from like Boston Harbor area all the way down to Tenino. And so we get the most easternly wedge and the most southeasternly wedge of the county within our precincts and our district. Now, the interesting thing about Thurston County is we're not entirely a progressive county. You might think that because we're the capital of the state and Olympia being at our core, that we would be predominantly progressive. However, we're not. We're about a 50-50 split, give or take a couple of percentage points, and depending on where you are within the district. So Olympia's core, obviously very progressive leaning, very democratic, but the further you go out into the rural communities within Thurston is where you start to see a lot more of the conservative minded folks, and you start to see a lot more of the Republican support. However, we still have a strong base in those rural communities as well.
Excellent, beautiful, thank you. I'll have one more question for you, and then I'll pass it off to someone else to give somebody else a chance.
Okay.
A big piece of what we are about, we work on anti-corruption, election reform, watching the money in politics, trying to get, all that. So a couple things for you. We do like to see, how are you fundraising? Are there any limitations that you would put on any donations? I mean, are there PACs or
Yeah.
corporations or things that you will or won't take money from? What's your idea of fundraising this campaign?
Oh man, fundraising has been rough. And it's interesting too, because we're very much running a values-based campaign. And because of that, it's been that much harder for me to reach out to my friends, my community members, and ask them for money when I know that everybody is struggling. And so that's been kind of a hindrance for me, just to try to overcome that barrier in asking people for help when I know that they're barely getting by themselves. And there's really no expectation that things are going to smooth out in the near term. So that's been a big concern of mine, is reaching out and asking for what I know people don't have. Beyond that, what I would say is what I'm not accepting money from super PACs. I'm not accepting money from large corporations. I'm not accepting money from fossil fuels of any kind. And again, I did sign the no fossil fuels pledges, nothing over $200 from those types of donors. I would actually go a little bit further and say that if I knew that somebody was a representative of fossil fuels or some large corporation, then I would reject wholly their contribution. It's a little bit harder for me with a really small team to go and to track down all that information. We do our best, but suffice to say, we have made that pledge and we will stand by it.
Beautiful, excellent. Another piece that we look at and that we're going to be wanting to push here in the next, well, from here on out, is really like a ranked choice voting system. Do you know much about that? And how do you feel about implementing ranked choice voting?
I just went through a ranked choice vote not too long ago, and actually it was a really eye-opening experience, just to have actually been a candidate in a ranked choice vote for the first time. I have historically been supportive of ranked choice voting, and I remain so. That vote did not really turn out in my favor by the end, but I still am supportive of ranked choice. I think it's the healthiest way for everybody to have a say in their elected leadership.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and, shift votes, voices. Amber or Courtney, which one? Courtney.
Right.
Courtney
we'll
wins.
Hi. I am curious. So our questionnaire, and I don't have access, I'm in the kitchen right now. I don't have access to your questionnaire. We wrote that months ago. And so the framing around racial equity and Black Lives Matter is currently dated because of the uptick of the subject. So in it, we mentioned Campaign Zero, which is Black Lives Matter's demands, and they have subsequently put out an 8 can't wait. There's also an 8 to abolish. So there's a lot of discussion around police and from reform to abolish. And I like to frame it as the reallocation of funds from policing to services that prevent or respond more appropriately to the needs of the community. Where can you tell us a little bit about where you're at in this discussion?
Yeah, and I'm actually really glad you asked, because this is something that I have had an eye on well before the current movement. I actually announced my candidacy back in November, and at that time I was already talking about accountability in local policing. I think that it's absolutely imperative that we look at all forms of accountability centered on citizens' oversight and centered on communities that are most disparately impacted by police brutality and oversteps in policing. Now, with that said, I also I like the idea of narrating the discussion through a reallocation of funds, because I think oftentimes when we say defund police, which is what we want, we do want to reduce the amount of funding to policing. People misunderstand that to mean that we want to completely get rid of all law enforcement. And I think we all know that that's kind of not a reality. We would like to see zero or much less dependence on law enforcement, but we know that there's always going to be murder. We know that there's going to be situations where law enforcement is needed. So what we need to be doing is looking at the systemic issues that are creating the crime in our local communities, and that are also, you know, disproportionately affecting marginalized communities through how police target people. And we do know that that type of racial profiling and that type of targeting does happen. And so, you know, what I would say is that I would love to see large sections of our budget be reallocated into social services that deal with some of the systemic and root causes of homelessness and inequity in housing and inequity in wages, and enable people to be actors in their economy and in their community in such a way that they are no longer reliant on, you know, so for example, the housing crisis. When we've got people living on the streets right now, it's not that they were drug addicts or users of drugs before becoming homeless. It's that they are now, and they're treating their homelessness with those drugs, because what do you expect them to do, right? It's a very uncomfortable thing to be living on the street. I know, because I have. And so, you know, when I look at these things, I see these as diseases of despair that we could be working within our system and social services to correct, rather than relying on police to do a job that they're not equipped to do. So yes, money needs to be going to social services and reprioritized in that way. What we saw here in Thurston County was actually that the Thurston County commissioners sided with law enforcement and opted to not give them a large cut to their budgets. And so we do need voices that are going to heavily advocate for defunding police, reallocating those funds into social services, and addressing the systemic root causes of inequity here in our region.
That is great. I have a quick question, and unless somebody
I wasn't sure if Courtney was finished, so.
And just so you know, I do still hashtag defund the police. I just feel like saying, as a candidate, do you want to defund the police? Seems a rather hard edge. So,
it is, but it is what we want to do. I mean, let's be brutally honest about it. That is what we want. We want police to have less resources so they can't be over militarized. They can't buy the weaponry and the assault vehicles and the tear gas that they're using against the citizenry. And we don't want them to be able to utilize brutality and targeting to over police our communities when we should be uplifting our communities.
So thank you.
Wonderful answer. I had a question. I'm also running for a county level seat, and I was curious to know what your current county levels of public safety and criminal justice are. What changes would you make? And then also, what has your current county done with CARES funding, and what changes would you make?
You know, the county, as far as CARES funding, has, you know, with the CARES Act. So a lot of the money that has come through the county has actually been put into social services and for homeless response and pandemic response. So I sit on the board of directors for Partners in Prevention and Education, which is one of the local nonprofit organizations that has received some of that continued funding through a renewed contract. And so we provide on the ground advocacy, counseling, and emergency supplies. So that's one of the ways in which the money has been utilized here locally. But we also see that there's been a lot of effort into directing a lot of those funds into other nonprofits in the area. And I think that process has been pretty effective. I do think that we need to be allocating more funds in that direction. Do I think that we can do that with the current level of funding from the CARES Act? Not necessarily, but we do need to investigate other avenues to spend more money in those areas to make sure that we're bolstering the portions of our community that are being hit the hardest right now. In terms of, now, can you go back to the first portion of that question again? Because I zeroed in on that.
Yeah, no worry. I do the same thing. So with the current public safety and criminal justice budget, what is the county at now, and what changes would you make?
I think it's about 37% of the budget. And I would like to see it at about probably no more than 20% of the budget. And so ways in which I think we can start moving in that direction, obviously, is incorporating more lean management within our structures, and bringing a lot more accountability and oversight to those budgets to ensure that we're actually putting the money where it's supposed to be going, and that there's no undue loss of revenues through poor planning. So there are ways in which we can do that. I also think that within the judicial system, within the police department, sheriff's department at the county level, we should be looking at ways in which we can reduce programs that are specific to enforcement and redirected that money again into diversionary programs and stuff of that nature. I think the county right now is looking at moving towards LEAD, which is law enforcement assisted diversionary programs, which I'm actually in favor of. I think that it does need to be looked at with a fine-tooth comb just to make sure there's enough accountability incorporated in that program. But that's one of the things the county is doing right now in terms of looking at how we address going forward the need for diversion and a more equitable policing and justice system.
Awesome. I applaud Thurston County. We are double that here in Snohomish.
Yeah. Much bigger county, much bigger section of your budget. Yeah. And do you think it's being used effectively? No.
I think Amber was just trying to cultivate answers from you.
I was also curious though. I mean, that's one of the things too, is we need to learn what our neighboring counties are doing and what different parts of the state are doing. And people tend to get in their little bubble and not coordinate and talk about these pieces enough. So I appreciate
I think one of the overarching things that our county may be looking at here in the near future is moving from a 3-member commission up to a council, either a 5 or 7-member council, so that we can more effectively organize without having to have a quorum-based meeting every time. Right now, as it stands, we've got 3 members, 2 members as quorum, so they can't have discussions or do any planning outside of that one Tuesday meeting. Beyond that, when you look at restructuring how county governance is done, I'm looking at things like a home rule charter and giving us the flexibility to better choose who's running our police and sheriff's department. Right now, we're also looking at recalling Thurston County Sheriff. So it's going to be a fun discussion over the next couple of months.
as are we in Snohomish County.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to ask, I'm in Pierce County. Mm-hmm. And so I know that we have a county council. Yep. And under their purview is the sheriff's department and the district attorney. There's a lot of influence there. So what would this position, what's the purview of it? So we know what to ask you about.
Well, and unfortunately, what I would say is as the rules are written right now, county commissioners have almost no say over how the sheriff runs their department right now. There's very, very little accountability. And so what I would want to do actually going forward is to create that accountability through independent oversight boards, the citizen ran boards, and a human rights commission that services the county. And so there are ways to apply pressure and ensure that counties are held accountable or that departments are held accountable. But right now, as it stands, we can't really dictate how the funds are used. All we can really do is an up or down vote on approval of a dollar amount for that specific department. So when we're talking about the sheriff, the county commissioners can say yay or nay. And that's effectively all we can do. And so my hope is that we can make some movement on that and incorporate more accountability going forward.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Any more in this piece, gals? All right. Shall we shift to healthcare? I know it's not necessarily just, a county, you're very specific, but we do see that, bully pulpits are useful. And
this one especially so.
Right. So universal single payer healthcare is, of course, what we are behind. Washington State has a beautiful bill. It's the whole Washington Trust. And one of the things that not only here that we need to do, but it's being called for nationwide for Medicare for All, is to actually go to our city councils and county councils and start asking and passing resolutions, so we can start showing that more and more communities, are behind this. So can you let us know how you feel? Do you know about whole Washington? If so, how do you feel about that bill? And would you be a champion of that even at your county level?
Yeah. So I reached out really early in the campaign actually to endorse Whole Washington. Before even running for office, I was a supporter of Whole Washington. I've been a good friend of Georgia Davenport's for a while now. She's amazing. The work that Whole Washington has done to organize on the ground for this cause is absolutely phenomenal. I do support single payer for all. I supported it when they called it Medicare for all. Under all of its various monikers, what we believe is that healthcare is a human right. And that we should all have no barrier access to healthcare, and we should all be covered at the same level with the same benefits, no matter where we are on the economic spectrum. So that's what I believe. And so to officiate that, obviously, we look towards programs like Medicare for All. We look towards programs and initiatives and movements like Whole Washington here in Washington State, which is a really great nonprofit approach to this whole discussion. And I think that what we as in the county can do, because here's the interesting thing, and I don't know that all counties are this way. I assume that they're fairly well in line. Washington State RCW indicates that county commissioners, county council people are the de facto lead of the LHJs in their region's Board of Health. So the 3 county commissioners here in Thurston County are the 3 members of the Thurston County Board of Health. And that board directs how we utilize and how we go about providing care and health services and social services in our county. So it has that much more weight when the 3 county commissioners in our county stand up and say, yes, we are resolved that we need to have a single payer healthcare system. And so, yes, I would be in favor of it. I would imagine that the 2 county commissioners that I'm looking at serving next to, if all goes according to plan, will also be in favor of that type of resolution. So I think that the composition of the board, should I be elected, will be such that we can put forth that resolution.
Ooh, I love that answer. Thank you. I don't think I need to go any deeper into healthcare. I think you covered it all. So Amber, Courtney, do you have another subject next?
Yeah, I have a question on what are special circumstances that your county faces that others may not? And my second part to that is, are there any particular utility issues in your district?
Yeah, so okay, let's start with utility issues. So the more rural portions of my district don't really have adequate access to broadband and internet. And again, I view access to that type of infrastructure again as a basic human right. Because how are we going to officiate education? How are we during a pandemic going to officiate people working from home if they don't even have the basic infrastructure to connect to the world around them? And realistically, what we know is that here in 2020, and even for the last 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, we've been heavily reliant on the internet to get our information. So connectivity is a fundamental need when we're talking about education, when we're talking about workplace safety, when we're talking about how to officiate an economy right now during a pandemic. That type of infrastructural access is paramount. And what we don't have is equitable access to that infrastructure throughout all of our district. So I would like to see us make some changes there. I'm actually hugely in support of moving to a PUD type setup for electricity, but I would also like to see something like that along the lines of our internet access and broadband. What I think we could do in the meantime is probably hotspot access, expand hotspot access from all of our Thurston County facilities. So that way, in the short term, what we can do is provide immediate access to people. So while they're looking for work, while we're trying to recover from this pandemic, that the barrier to them re-engaging in our economy is not lack of internet. Beyond that, I think we do have maybe one big unique challenge here in Thurston County, in that we are the seat of power. And so when we're talking about a pandemic, and we're talking about spread of a pandemic, and we're talking about infrastructural issues like broadband, what we're really saying is that we're having a lot of people from out of county come into county to officiate work and business and political, political ventures and whatever the case may be. And because of that, we see increased risk of exposure here in Thurston County. So that's one of the unique challenges that I think that Thurston County has, just by being the seat of power for the state.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Courtney? Yeah, sorry, there's your head. Yep.
I'm just wondering, so at the county, I'll give you one at a time. What can you do for housing? What ideas do you have for housing? Just cause rent control, any tenants' rights, any public housing ideas?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things that I would like to see happen really quickly is a county-hosted mitigation site. So there's been discussion of it over the last couple of years. There's been a lot of resistance, but I also don't think we have the willpower on board within our board members to get it done. So I think that's something we need to look to kind of as a stopgap measure for those people who are currently underhoused or unhoused in Thurston County, and that also goes to help some of the various municipalities throughout the county that are really at this point bearing the burden. And so we need to share that burden a little bit throughout the county and provide resources and a space, a managed site for people to go to where they can be safe and they can get back on their feet. So I think that's one of the things that I want to look at really early on in terms of housing. But beyond that, we need to be looking at creative ways to incentivize housing. And that's obviously prioritizing affordable housing. What I would want to see is that we're not giving tax incentive or breaks or any kind of allowances on impact fees or offset fees to large developers that are choosing to only put forth market rate or luxury housing. I would say that any of that type of cut or benefit or incentive should be going exclusively to those developers who want to create affordable housing that's accessible and no barriers. So I think that's one of the ways in which as a county we can be actually prioritizing affordable housing, is to only provide incentives for affordable housing. The other thing that I would like to see is some land use flexibility in diversifying our housing. I think Thurston County also should be looking at more ADU type of options. Right now, you can only really host basically an RV on your property, and you can only really have a family member living in that. So we need some DADU options, detached ADUs that we can have in Thurston County for people that are not necessarily just the homeowner's family or the property owner's family. So providing that flexibility helps increase the available housing stock in a diversity of ways. I think that we also need to be looking at how we can incentivize and invest in larger scale housing developments and avoiding urban sprawl, because that's one of the things that we're having a big challenge with in Thurston County, is moving too far out into the rural areas of the county and displacing workers, meaning that they have to drive from further out in the county into the core of the county, into Olympia, oftentimes for work. And the barriers to do that are much higher for those of us who are not economically well off.
Excellent, thank you. This is a little tangential to healthcare and jailing, really. But how do you feel about safe consumption sites?
I don't have a problem with safe consumption sites. Realistically, I would rather people be, going to a place where they can be supervised and where end of life is not the primary concern with usage. And so I think through those sites, we can also offer a variety of resources for people to, change their direction if they so choose. And so I think that's one way that we can officiate it. And we need to do it in such a way that it's also no barrier, that people have no fear in going to these places to seek resources. And so, yeah, I would certainly be in favor of safe injection sites throughout the county.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. We were, oh, did he leave? Jeffrey was coming in, so I thought I'd give him an option, but I think he left. Real quick, I'm going to go to, before I was going to go to what I did, what I have next for you. Frank put in here some stuff he kind of touched on, but I'm going to read the full question.
Okay.
So he would like to know how you feel about municipal internet, which you could kind of talk about that, and the spraying of toxic chemicals across the state with emphasis on glyphosate. So I know you talked about the municipal internet.
And I stand by that. I still want to see municipal options for internet and broadband. And so I'll uplift that again, because I really think it's imperative that we look at going in those directions, especially now, given that in September, as Washington schools open, they're really going to only be opening online. So students that don't have access, parents that don't have access to the internet are going to have that much more trouble maintaining a quality level of education, maintaining involvement, involvement, maintaining progress in their educational cycle for their children, but also maintaining access to their workplace. And so, yeah, I stand by those earlier comments with the broadband. But moving on to the spraying of toxic chemicals, generally speaking, I oppose the spraying of toxic chemicals in agricultural spaces for means of bolstering agriculture or for weed control or anything of that nature. I in these types of discussions, historically, I've been more focused on like neonics and avoiding use in our agricultural spaces of chemicals that are detrimental to the bee population. So that's been my primary focus, is wanting to put forth an initiative or an ordinance in the county that is prohibitive of the use of toxic chemicals that would be detrimental to bee populations and or adverse to a positive and working environment.
Excellent. I was going to talk about education next, but I know this subject is important to Courtney and Amber and others here. So I want to leave this open in case there's any follow-up or any questions, because I want to do on, I think Courtney does. Oh, you said no? You're good? Amber, you're good? Okay. All right. With the education piece, so I'm glad you touched on that, because that's what I was going to talk about next. And with COVID and the schools, is how it's going to be mostly, online learning and things like that. What do you think in your position, or with county councilor seat, what are some ideas of how to try to make it most equitable and safe, of course? What are some things you're thinking about that you could possibly lend to maybe help this out? Because you're looking at childcare, you're looking at so many factors of somebody's life being affected. So it's more than just school, right? How do you think that you can look at supporting the community during this big change?
Well, and I think initially the conversation is centered around social services, right? So it's centered around providing adequate access to social services. And that means, in my opinion, at least, it means also providing daycare services where available. I do gather that that has been one of my concerns also, is daycare, because when we prematurely open daycare facilities, what we're also doing is creating vectors for spread of the COVID virus. And so that's equally concerning to me. So I know that, not having daycare options, not having schools open is hugely challenging for parents, hugely challenging, but it's also in their best interest and in their children's best interest to stay home. And so this is the discussion really that we're having, is how do we provide the resources for those parents to enable them to feel comfortable having their kids at home and it being less of a struggle for them, right? And so there definitely is a limit to what county commissioners can do in terms of education, because education itself is not really under the purview of the county commission. We don't even really deal with funding. What we do is approve bonds and levy increase caps and stuff along those lines, but social services is something that we deal with the Department of Health and with the county commission as a whole. And so what we should be doing is initiatives that promote education and awareness and provide additional resources and connectivity for parents, in terms of food access, in terms of internet access, ensuring, because we have a lot of students that even while they were in school were already facing challenges with food. And so I would like to see the county not only continue but also increase its ability to provide food for at-home kids and families during this time, and really kind of uplifting and providing the wraparound services that they need to be effective while they're at home learning.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you for that. There was something left in my brain, but then it went away when you went off onto something. So I think you did capture what I was kind of looking at. There was something and it's just stuck. Amber, Courtney, anything real quick while I'm trying to remember that?
Yeah, I was wondering what sets you apart from the incumbent and other candidates in the race.
Yeah, so, well, I'm the only gay one, that's for sure. That we know of. And so that's one of my differentiating factors. I bring a unique bit of diversity in that way, a bit of diversity that is not currently present on the Board of County Commissioners, and a voice that I think is sorely lacking in all levels of governance. So that is something that I bring to the table. I also bring small business experience. I'm a worker, I'm a renter, I'm a youth, I'm a student. I have student loan debt, so I understand the firsthand struggles of people in our community and of renters in a way that a lot of the other candidates and the incumbent don't have experience with, at least in terms of the current experience for young people and how we navigate the world. And I also think that there are really only two people in this race, myself and the other progressive, who speak to youth values and a serious drive and vision to provide for an environment that is going to be sustainable for not only us, but also for future generations. So because we're looking at the environment and saying, hey, that's my life in 30 years, 40 years from now, and those are my kids and my family that I'm looking out for, and we need to make those changes now. And so we need voices that are looking that far in our futures to advocate for the changes that need to happen. And so I think that's one of the things that differentiates me in terms of my experience and what I bring to the table is my vision as somebody who's young and looking at the situation in terms of in a more long-term manner. And so I think that being a worker is really important as well, because we don't have really any adequate representation for labor. We don't have really any adequate representation for better wages and benefits other than just the unions that are advocating and doing collective bargaining with the county commissioner. So we need county commissioners who understand what it is to be a worker that's not making great wages, that didn't have super great benefits their whole life, and who are going to understand when the unions come to them to collectively bargain for better worker benefits and understand and want to have that discussion and be at the table fully and 100% in that discussion. And so I think that that's something that sets me apart a little bit as well, as having that blue collar worker experience. I'm also the only one, the sole endorsed candidate by WFC, which is our local state employees union, so the local 443, representing over 8,000 workers here. And so I think it's really important that I have that representation, because I really do advocate for, and I've said this before, but my campaign is really about youth, workers, renters, and marginalized community members. That's what it's about. And so those are the voices I want to uplift. And it's really important that we have representation who live in those worlds at the table.
Ah, that's great. If there's nothing else really pressing from Amber or Courtney, this is the time I was going to let you expand to talk about something that we may not have touched on yet. And this last spiel that you did hit some good parts. So thank you for that. Yeah. But I do want to give you still time to make sure that you know, everybody knows what you want them to know about you. And then also let them know where to find you, you know, how they can help and all that good kind of thing.
Well, you can find me on the corner of Evergreen and Lake. No, I'm kidding. So
bring your signs, right?
Bring your signs. But realistically, like I said before, this is really what the core of my candidacy is about. It's about uplifting and providing a voice at the table for youth, for workers, for renters, and for people in marginalized communities. We are doing that in our campaign because we're a values-based campaign, we're a grassroots campaign, and we're really focused on providing a voice for those members of our communities first and foremost, because they've been the most disparately impacted in our economic challenges, in our housing challenges, in our wage struggles, in our labor struggles, and in education, and any number of other ways. And especially now, given this pandemic, it's that much more important that we have that representation at the table, advocating for members of our community. And so, yeah, what I would say as far as what I stand for above and beyond what I've discussed, which is interesting because I think you've covered most of my platform. But the other token to my platform that we didn't really touch on too heavily is the environment. So I'm looking at issues that are really complex here in the county. We're looking at a new county courthouse, which is great for workers, but we're also looking at environmental challenges that come along with that. Like, so do we build a courthouse on liquefaction soil? What is going to be the impact to our local waterways? What is going to be the impact to salmon runs? And so these are all portions of that calculation. But beyond that, beyond those really hyper localized issues, we also see water issues along our shorelines. We are seeing industrialized aquaculture. And so these are things that I'm focused on wanting to reduce the amount of industrial aquaculture in our water spaces and on our shorelines. We want to do a lot of restoration and conservation conservation efforts. We want to be good stewards of our environment. And so this is something that's a core pillar in my platform, because I, for one, would love to have a breathable environment, a livable environment for the next 30 years, but I would like your children to have the same. And I would like their children to have the same. And so it's not, you know, it's not something that I stepped up and said, you know, I'm the only one that can advocate for this. It's more about nobody is stepping up right now and advocating for this at this level of government right now in this time. And that's why I stepped up to do it. So again, this campaign is really about forefronting accountability and oversight, forefronting the need for affordable housing, for critical services and access to infrastructure. It's about ensuring that we have a sustainable environment and that we are good stewards of that environment going forward. And it's about bringing all the voices that are not currently represented to the table. So if you would like to find more information about me, a little bit more about my personal story, you can go to www.voterory.com. On the website there at the very top, you're going to find some contact information for the campaign. You can sign up to volunteer there. You can donate there. And you can also, you know, there's a phone number and an email address right at the top. But the email for the campaign is really simple. It's just info@voterory.com. And again, the phone number is right there on the website. So if you want to call because you have more direct questions, feel free. There's also a questions box right there on the website. So you just type your question right in and click send and you're good to go. And we're really good about being responsive to the questions. We want to make sure that we're answering your questions and providing you a means to get involved with the campaign. We would really welcome the help. We have another sign waving event this Sunday here in Thurston County. And we right now are doing really great in fundraising, but obviously we are looking at another 3 months in this race because we plan to get through the primary. So if you can help us out, send a couple dollars our way. Again, you can do that through the website at voterory.com.
Excellent. Beautiful job. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us for yet again another interview. I love these things. So I thank you for your time as well. And we will see you guys all soon.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.